Welcome to Newhaven, where I, as an urban design graduate, will attempt to build a city. Although most likely what will end up happening is chaos. Let's get started. The best way to start building a city is by, of course, deleting everything in sight. We're building on the River Delta map, which I thought was perfect for my little Dutch heart because I thought, oh, River Delta, it's going to be a nice flat area. Nope, this map is surprisingly hilly, but we're trying to work with that, although I will flatten out areas because I don't want every house to be on a different elevation. But the biggest difference, or the biggest change that I had to do right from the get-go was the original layout, the layout that was given with the map, because the highway was spilling out directly into the city, which, if you know anything about Dutch roads and the speed allowance, and a lot of Newhaven is going to be based off of the Netherlands, but the highway, at least in the Netherlands, you're allowed to drive 100 to 130 kilometers an hour, depending on where you are. And then in the city, or in an urban setting, you will be allowed to drive 30 kilometers an hour on those streets. So going from the highway, so at most 130 kilometers an hour, into the city where you're allowed to only drive at 30 kilometers an hour, that would just be asking for accidents. You would need only one distracted driver to not de-accelerate fast enough to cause a massive accident. So I needed to have this middle road. It's not the correct term for it, but I'm trying to very quickly translate my thoughts from Dutch into English, because I know the Dutch terms for everything. It's just I need to translate everything, and my brain's translation speed is like a hamster in a hamster wheel, but the hamster is dead. So yeah, I'm just going to call it middle road, but those are the roads usually connecting towns and cities and such, not really the streets in the city itself. But those are usually the roads where you're allowed to drive 50 to 80 kilometers an hour, which already, even 80 kilometers an hour is just enough of a difference where if you're going from 80 to 30 with a roundabout, that's enough of closeness in speed that you wouldn't immediately just have massive accidents right from the get-go. And it just looks a lot nicer. It works really well here because there was already one of those middle roads on the starting section of this map. So it was very easy for me to just connect the road coming off the highway onto the road that was already there. So we have this nice ring road going across next to the city. And it makes a lot of sense. Then also having the roundabout, which just allows a nice flow of traffic, because you don't really, in most cases, you don't need to stop at a roundabout. Only if you get on the roundabout and there's already a car driving there, that's the only time that you really need to stop. Most of the times you just need to slow down, which if you're going into the city works really well. And if you want to continue, then you don't really need to just pile on the gas afterwards, because you didn't come to a complete stop most of the times. Anyway, so that is it for the roads. And then we're going into Newhaven itself, which the theme for Newhaven is a mess, a beautiful mess. Because if you look at cities, that's what they are. At best you would be able to probably call them a patchwork. Because cities, unlike how you built them in City Skylines, are not designed by one person realistically. They are built over centuries by multiple different developers, architects. There's multiple things that influence how a city is laid out, how a city is designed. There's of course politics and current situations and such. There's a lot of things that go into the design and layout of a city. And I wanted Newhaven to kind of reflect that. So you will have the entry into Newhaven, which is this very, I would say, designed layout. It's very much you have this one design and you put it on both or on either side of the entry road. So it's kind of, symmetrical. So that was probably designed by one person. But then you have this other neighborhood hanging onto the entry area for Newhaven. I had to really just stop myself from calling it Newhaven, because that's just something that my brain likes to do. Even though I come up with the name myself, my brain is just like, nope, we're just going to not call it that. You are going to call it Newhaven, even though that's not the name that you've agreed upon. So, anyways, there is this other development on hanging on to the entry into Newhaven that, as you can see, like the entryway, as I said, is very designed, very kind of grid-like. But then you have this development hanging on to the sides that's a lot differently designed. Like, it's not a grid, it's more of like sort of trees or roots coming out of the street. So you can already see like, oh yeah, that was probably developed or thought of and designed by somebody else. Probably like maybe the entryway or entry into Newhaven was designed either 30 years ago or was redesigned or redeveloped quite like recently. And most of the time, like, redevelopments are quite expensive. Most of the time you want to renovate what's there, because that's a lot less expensive to do that. Sometimes it's just like, alright, what is there we just can't use? It's not up to current taste, it's not up to current ideas. Best example of that is, for the Netherlands at least, again, a lot of things in Newhaven, because I'm Dutch, are going to weigh heavily onto how we do it in the Netherlands. But a big example of like, oh, redevelopment or renovations is the housing of after the Second World War, because the Netherlands was basically bombed flat. So after the Second World War, we needed very quick housing just to house as many people as possible, which you can really see in those developments, because it's usually these like freestanding flats, usually like 5 stories tall, maybe 4, 3, but usually it's very block-like. And that worked really well back then, but nowadays we look at that and are like, we would do it differently, because this feels kind of closed off. It feels kind of like samey everywhere, which is kind of the case, because it was just like a design and was kind of copy-pasted over a lot of places. But nowadays we think of those things as like, oh, we don't really want to go there or develop that anymore. We want to do things differently. But back then, that was perfectly fine. It was really liked because it's solved a current crisis, or at that time, a current crisis. And nowadays, it's just like, yeah, we don't have that crisis anymore, so we won't really work with that anymore. We will do things differently now because tastes and everything have changed. So that's something that I need to consider as well. Because I also want it to be, like, I'm not striving for full realism, because that would probably kill any motivation and enjoyment that I will have. But I will try and make things slightly realistic. My biggest issue with Newhaven right now is still that highway, because for the majority of the length of that highway, it's a bridge. I don't think I need to explain to you guys that a bridge can be very expensive, especially if they're very long and very high. So that bridge is just so unrealistic. It spans multiple islands, which is of course really nice, because I want the main part of Newhaven to be on the islands, but it's just so unrealistic that even I am just like, nope. As soon as I get to the point where I can build highways, I will change that highway. And here's also another thing: don't get attached to anything that you see right now, because as the city grows, as Newhaven develops, we will attain the milestones and get more stuff to build with, which will allow me to, as I said, build another highway or a new highway and build up other stuff that I would have built here, but I just can't get to it now because it's locked behind a milestone. I did want to keep the milestones just because it would be more interesting because it would again have that debate of like, do I renovate this? Do I redevelop it? What's going to be slightly more realistic? And also, what's just going to be fun? Because it's a lot of fun for me to build with those challenges. Anyways, the biggest challenge actually for Newhaven and just City Skylines in general for me, right now we're building the industrial area because we need an industrial area. Like any town in City Skylines, 1 or 2, starts off with an industrial area because people need to work somewhere. But anyways, the biggest difficulty that I have with not just City Skylines 2, not just City Skylines 1 or Newhaven is you almost never realistically build from scratch. Like at least in the Netherlands and I think most of Europe, cities aren't usually built from scratch anymore. You're usually building off of a city that has been there for centuries or in the least decades. Like the last time that we really, at least in the Netherlands, built a city from scratch is when we had the land reclamation of the Flevo polder. So yeah, I'm probably melting your brains right now because that was a bit of Dutch, but basically in the middle of the Netherlands or the center of the Netherlands, you have or had this sea. But now it's more of a lake because we dammed it off and then we made the Flevo polder, which is this huge land reclamation. Is practically, well, it is another province that we basically built out of the water. And that's the, I think, last time so far as I'm aware that we really needed to build cities and towns and such from scratch. Because yes, we now have this huge plat of new land, but if you want to use it, you need people to live there. So then it was like, we have nothing here, like there's nothing that leads to it, because at the time of the construction of the Flevo polder was, of course, no roads yet going through it. So it was just like, oh yeah, that is probably a place that I could take the most inspiration from. And just thinking, all right, how would I do that? Because in City Skylines, you are always building from scratch. Like the only anchor points that I had for Newhaven were the highway that I am very much detesting because again, it's so unrealistic with a giant bridge, and the road or the middle road coming from the other side of the map or other side of the starting location of the map. I'm confusing even myself here. And the terrain, like the height levels. So I'm trying to work off that. I am going to flatten things out a little bit just so that not every house is on a different elevation. But I did want to kind of work with like, oh yeah, this is the only anchor points that I have. Like the terrain, the river, the highway, the road coming into it, and then the differences in height. Although, again, I was really hoping to go into this map and have a somewhat flat map. Like the Netherlands is not completely flat, but mostly flat. So I was just like, this is going to be difficult, but at least I have a few anchor points. Like if you would have given me a completely flat, empty map, I would be screaming at this point. Because it's just like, I can't draw anything from this. Like if anyone is able to build a city like completely from scratch and there's no anchor points, there's no highway, there's no river, roads or something, basically just any map maker, I applaud you because I wouldn't be able to do that without going stir crazy. Anyways, let's quickly catch you guys up on what I've done so far. Alright, quick catch up of what has been done so far. So, main part of the village is done. And right now it's very peaceful, very serene. But as you can see by the water, time is paused. As soon as I unpause it, it becomes a construction site. Same goes for the industrial area. And yes, I heard that there was demand for murder movie backgrounds. So we of course put the graveyard in the forest, nice and secluded. But now let's continue building up this island and trying to make this kind of work. Kinda. So building the island was not on the original planning for today. I really thought that like, oh, what we've built on the mainland, that's going to be it. But I wanted to reach the second milestone, and for that I needed more people. Although, thinking of it right now, I could have probably just continued letting the game play, and then the mainland part of Newhaven would have probably gotten that amount of people as well. I just didn't allow them to move in because I was impatient. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to continue building. So I wanted the island to have the same idea as the mainland, have this patchwork idea of like different developers, different looks for certain neighborhoods and such. I wanted to honor the terrain that was already there. I did flatten it out, of course, because I didn't want every house to be on a different elevation. But the main idea was, alright, it has this higher side on one area of the island, and then on the other side, it's a little bit lower. So I flattened it out so that it does have this hill, it does have this lower area, but it's just a flat hill and a flat lower area. Just because that's prettier. Like, this is, again, I'm not going for full realism. Most likely, this amount of height difference would have been, like, a little bit less flattened out. Like, it would have been a little bit more worked with. But I was just like, yeah, with all of the curves, because I'm following the curves of the coastline, this is already going to look a bit messy, which, as I said in the beginning, that's the entire theme of Newhaven, is to be messy. But I don't want it to go to the extreme where it's just like everything is chaos. Like, it's a limited amount of chaos that I want. But yeah, continuing on with the island, just laying out the roads and such, and not figuring out that right from the get-go I could build parks. Well, not really parks, but I have left a lot of spaces open for parks and such, but I thought like, oh, I need to reach a certain milestone before I can actually build the parks. Which is true, there are like the placeable parks, but I was thinking of like pathways and trees, which are actually available to you right from the get-go. They're just not under the park step, they're on the landscaping, and so I didn't think of that. So here's another case of don't get too attached to anything, because I will discover new things or just be a complete dumbass and oversee things and then later on change things. But anyways, at this point, we reach a milestone. Alright, we reached the second milestone, which was basically the goal of today. But I'm just going to continue building up the rest of the island and letting it grow up even further. Maybe we will even reach the third milestone. Also, I now need to do the worst thing, which is building a fucking school. Let's get on with that. And now to build the worst thing imaginable. A school. Now, I don't really dislike schools and such. It's just, I dislike how large they are in city skylines. Like, I had not designed Newhaven for this. I really thought like, oh, you know, primary school, it's going to be quite small. It's going to be like the building, a playground, maybe a field to play football, maybe like a little plaza for children to be picked up by their parents and such. I didn't think that it would be this large that I had to just completely demolish an entire neighborhood for it. It's such a large footprint. Like the high school, I get that that's like larger because usually those have a lot more children attending. But why is the primary school so huge? I mean, it kind of works because it's the only school or like the only primary school so far in Newhaven. Most likely Newhaven by this point would have 2 schools or primary schools. But yeah, I don't know why it's this huge. I'm really waiting now just for the mods of just like, I want a smaller school. Because I want a school in a neighborhood. I don't want a school in a city. Going off of like one school in a neighborhood or like multiple neighborhoods and not just like, oh, I need one school for the entire city. Just to clarify that. I just want multiple schools in a city without them just taking over the entire place. Anyways, we're ending with a nice little shopping area, and this does in no way decrease the demand for shopping and industry. Alright, that's going to be it for today. We've started Newhaven and it has grown quite a bit further than I originally had planned, because originally I had only planned the place on the mainland, but we grabbed this island with it as well. But anyways, for the next video we are going to have to tackle industry, because yeah, industrial demand is through the roof. But anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. If you liked it, throw a chicken at the like button, and if you want to see more, throw all of this rain at the subscribe button, because of course when I need to make an outro, it starts raining. Anyways, that's going to be it for today. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye bye.